University of Tennessee, and it's not on the syllabus, but every semester, one or two students come up to me and say, "Can you help me write a resume?" And I always tell them, you know, especially at your age, your resume should be 1 page long. And 1 page, and we'll spruce it up, we'll make it look good. And so I help them with that. And when I was doing research on our guest speaker today, I went on the website on UT, on her website, and was going through some things. And at the bottom of it, it has a tab for her CV, and it's 8 pages long. I think she's much too young to have an 8-page resume. So, but I whittled it down, so I don't want to talk for an hour with that, but I whittled it down for you. So, Dr. Marianne Wanamaker is the Dean of the University of Tennessee's Howard H. Baker Jr. School of Public Policy and Public Affairs. She's a professor of economics and public policy. She's a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics and at the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. Dr. Wanamaker is former chief domestic economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors, where she also served as the senior labor economist. Dr. Wanamaker is a 2001 summa cum laude graduate of Vanderbilt University, where she was a member of Phi Beta Kappa. She completed her master's degree and PhD at Northwestern in 2009 and has been on the faculty at the University of Tennessee ever since. Dr. Wanamaker expertise in labor economics, education, and workforce development. I took several economic courses in college, and every time I look at my bank statement, it reminds me I should have paid more attention. So I will pay more attention today. So Marianne and her husband live in Knoxville. They have 2 beautiful daughters, and I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Marianne Wanamaker.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I really hate that part, so I'm glad we're through it. I'm coming to you today as an economist. So there's a fork in the road when I get invited to come speak. I can either talk about the Baker School or I can talk about the economy. These days, people want to hear about the economy more than they want to hear about the Baker School, but you're a captive audience, so you're going to get a little bit of both. We're 2 years in to the Baker School. Many of you know the predecessor to that organization, which is the Baker Center, which has been on campus for almost 20 years. The Baker School is 2 years old, which means we're 2 years into hosting students and granting degrees. The first year we hosted about 30 master's students. We're in our second year, we're hosting 143 students. I think as of our head count this morning, that was 100 undergrads and 43 grad students. And we expect to be at 265 next year. So we're growing like crazy. It's a really fun place to be right now. And then I want to just share with all of you, because you appear to be in the practice of learning things. You appear to be lifelong learners. I think that's why you're sitting here. So because of that, I would just encourage you, go to our website, join our mailing list. We have gotten ourselves into the business of public debates. And it's been the most fun in the last few months. So we did one a couple weeks ago on trade policy. We did one last week on birthright citizenship, which basically previews the argument that's going to go before the Supreme Court in the middle of May. And then we're working on our schedule for the fall. So please stay connected to us, follow us on social media, get involved in that way. It really has been a ton of fun. But today, I'm mostly going to talk to you about the economy. But I'm going to give you, I have the privilege of, within the Baker School, we host the Institute of American Civics. And so I'm well steeped now in Thomas Jefferson and George Washington ways that I wasn't 3 years ago. So anyway, I'm giving you this quote to just think about. And so one of the things that I love about organizations like yours is just how extraordinarily rare they are. The practice of sitting in a room with people in the middle of the week who don't agree with you politically, you're in the 1% of the population that does that routinely. And so I commend you for doing that, and I commend you for keeping a steady stream of speakers in here that's keeping you up to date on what's going on in the world. I think that's really extraordinary. I'm going to switch mics before I go in there. Okay. So, yes, 2 on. Okay, so now is this on? Okay, so now I'm going to try to stand still, which is a whole other challenge. Okay. All right, so here, if you've seen me speak before, raise your hand. So you know the first slide, right? You remember the first slide? It's always the same. I don't ever change it. I just add lines and subtract lines, but it's always the same slide. It's a slide of economic growth, okay? Because if you don't understand this, you don't understand your country, okay? So this is one, I do it in various ways. This one is dated back to 2005. The black line is the United States. The orange line is Tennessee, just for fun. I'm indexing everybody to a starting point in Q1 of 2005. So we all started the race at the same place, and then let's just run the race and see who's winning, okay? So this is the size of the economy, the amount of goods and services that are produced in real terms, so not including inflation, right? And so the way to read this thing is just to subtract 100. So the US at the end of this 20-year period is approximately 49% larger than we were when we started, 149 on that marker. Tennessee is exceeding the national average, so we're about 54% bigger than where we started. And then you can see our peer countries in the G7. I excluded Italy because they almost fall off of this chart at the bottom. But Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Japan just gives you a sense of where we are relative to our peers. I'm a hyper competitive person, so I'll say competitors, okay? Way ahead. Like, it's not even close. Okay, the only country that maintained any part of the race with us was Canada, and they fell off in the pandemic because we managed the pandemic better than any country on this any country on this planet. I know that's hard to believe. Okay, you might still give the government a B, but you can't give them an F. Okay, because we managed it better than everyone else did. I know you're still frustrated. I know there's a bunch of stuff you would have done differently, but I'm just telling you, we did it better than everybody else did. You can see the evidence is right here. Okay, Tennessee did it better than the rest of the country. If you look, you can see that Tennessee, Canada, and the United States are all right together. Right before 2020, we all fall off together. Tennessee comes out of the pandemic on a roar. Do you know why? Because Tennesseans don't listen to authority, we did whatever the heck we wanted to. Okay, so that is what that is about. Okay, and then we have stayed, I'm not really kidding, and then we have stayed ahead of the curve since the pandemic. Okay, so this is the backdrop. I think this is the backdrop for understanding every piece of economic policy, everything that's going on in the world right now, everything that our government is choosing to do. I think you have to understand it in this context, okay? Way ahead. So those of you who like to think in actual percentage terms, right, over the 20-year period, we grew at 2.2% a year. Over the 10-year, it was 3% a year, and over the last 5 years, it's been 3.2% a year. That's extraordinary. Okay, I can stop right there, honestly. We can have a conversation about that, but I won't. I do want to go back. Y'all are international, y'all have international aspirations and roots and organizations, and you travel, okay? So just think about what it's like to live in a place like Japan, okay, which is 10% bigger than it was 20 years ago, right? It's just a totally different ballgame. And the flattening out, you can really see the flattening out in Germany and the UK in the last 5 years in particular. That has had enormous social and political consequences. What's weird, I think, about the US situation is that we've also had enormous social and political consequences, but without the flat growth. We kind of acted like we had flat growth, right? Those countries actually did have flat growth. Okay, so pretend you're back in college. I want to talk for a minute about where growth comes from. Why do countries grow? And so I could pop quiz. I could make Cindy answer this question, but I won't. So where does growth come from? So I'm going to tell you that this is the most important thing I learned when I worked in the White House from 2017 to 2018, is to think about growth in these terms and never think about it any other way. Okay, you can only get growth from one of two things. You can have more people who are equally as productive as the people you had before, or you can have the same number of people who get more productive. That's it. Does that make sense? Y'all are smart enough to know what I mean by productivity in that phrase, right? It just means like output per person. So that's it. That's the only way you get growth. More people, equally productive as everyone else, or same number of people, they're more productive, or some combination of the two, right? Okay, so that's how I want to talk about economic growth today, because I want to think about how is Tennessee doing on those two things, more people or more productive people. Okay, all right. So let me start here. Let me start with the more people part. So same time period, Tennessee versus the rest of the country, we're ahead. Okay, so we have grown, our population has grown by 21% or so over those 20 years, and the US is closer to 15%, right? So Tennessee has benefited from a more robust rate of population growth. Again, if you want to know what those actual numbers are, over the 20-year period, Tennessee has grown by 1% per year in population, US has grown by 0.75%. All right, now is where the slide is not appropriate to the room because it's going to be hard for all of you to see it. So just hang with me for a second, okay? I broke this up as best I could. That was sometimes I thought it was going to be. Okay, so I want to think about that population growth number and split it into its component parts, okay? So on the left-hand side, I'm showing you from the last 4 years, so coming out of the pandemic, looking at population growth in the US. On the left side, the US overall has grown by 0.6% in population each year over those 4 years. No, that does not include all of the illegal immigration, okay? So there's nothing I can do about that, it's just not in these numbers. If you look at that by region, the Northeast, 0.1% per year in population growth, the Midwest, 0.2%, the South has been the big winner in population growth, y'all know this for the past 4 years, 1.1%, the West is at 0.4%, and Tennessee has been at 1%. Right? We rank 11th in the country in terms of our rate of population growth. That's a good thing. That's a great thing, especially if you're trying to hire bodies. Like, this is great, okay? All right, so where is the growth coming from? So you get population growth from 3 things. You either have babies, immigrants, or domestic migrants. These are your options, okay? So the right-hand side is showing you how much of this total is coming from what we call natural increase. So the difference in births and deaths, okay? So for the country overall, which is growing by 0.6% a year, 0.1% is coming from births minus deaths. Okay, we're just about static in terms of being able to replace ourselves, okay? And so every region in the country is struggling with that. Tennessee is shrinking on its own. If we close the borders, okay, Tennessee would shrink because people die here a lot more often than they die in other states because we're not very healthy, okay? And we haven't offset that with a whole bunch of babies. So we don't have a huge Mormon population, there aren't a whole lot of Catholics in Tennessee, so we're not doing a great job on the birth side, and so here we are, okay? So we're shrinking. Okay, so, all right, so this is not our advantage. We're 11th overall, but we're 33rd in terms of our own ability to replace ourselves. Ugh. Okay? What about domestic migration? Okay, people coming from other states. This is where Tennessee shines. You know this because your neighbors are from California and New York and wherever else, right? We're real good at this. Okay, so again, left-hand side, total change for the United States is 0.6. There is no such thing as domestic net migration to the United States, so that disappears on the right side. The Tennessee, of the total 1% growth, we're getting 0.8 of it from domestic net migration, okay, over this 4-year period, right? So this is our whole story, is we have been attractive to people coming to Tennessee. Why have they come here? Well, we don't have an income tax, and it's a nice place to live. And we have traditionally had cheaper housing. We don't have cheaper housing anymore, newsflash, but we used to have cheaper housing, and that was a good reason for people to come. Weather's great, schools are good, blah, 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 okay? And you'll notice that all of these things have played to the South's favor, right? So net migration has been the way that the South has grown and the rest of the country has shrunk. Okay, then the final piece, of course, is immigration. So people who are coming to the country and to Tennessee from other countries. So the vast majority of the growth in the US population is coming from international migration. That's the natural conclusion when you don't have a lot of natural change. It has to be coming from immigration. And then if you look at Tennessee, we are way behind the rest of the country in terms of how much of our population growth comes from international migration, right? So we are 39th in the country on that metric, right? So our story, our economic growth story from a human perspective, from a how we're going to get more workers, has been, over the last 4 years, about people moving here from other parts of the country. Right? That has not, I'm sure this is no surprise to you, that has not been evenly experienced across the state. So I am from the northwest corner, right? People don't move there. sorry. If you're from the northwest corner, you won't be offended by that. I mean, it's just the truth. People don't move there. Not like they do to East Tennessee. It's a totally different operation. Sometimes I look at that figure and think it's like East Germany, West Germany, but in reverse. It is just, West Tennessee is struggling with population growth. They are not a destination for internal migration. They look like Arkansas and Mississippi in those cases. They do not look like Middle Tennessee and East Tennessee, right? So we kind of have, there's sort of two different stories within the state that I think are really important. Okay, now, I need you to hold two things in your, I know you already feel like you're holding like five, but I need you to add another one. I need you to hold two things in tension at the same time. Okay, I just told you that our story has been about domestic migration, people coming to Tennessee from other parts of the country. What I'm about to tell you is that when you dig into the dynamics of that, it really changed in the last couple of years in a way that has made our state much more dependent on immigrants. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that. So the next slide, I'm going to give you a much longer term view of those pieces of population growth. Okay, so the green part is the births minus deaths, that's the natural change part. The blue part is international immigrants, and the gray part is domestic migration coming from the rest of the country. Okay, so look how small that international migration slice is from 2001 to 2010, from 2011 to 2020. It's just not a big part of the story. Part of that is because the natural change is healthy, right? So it's eating up a big part of that bar. Now look at what happens the last 4 years. The green line is below, is negative because we're shrinking in those years. Lots of Tennesseans died from COVID, okay? So 21 and 22, we are really shrinking as a state internally. We're getting our growth in 2021 almost entirely from domestic migration, but watch that blue line grow, okay? And so by the end of this period, by 2024, international migrants to the state are not to be ignored in terms of our overall ability to grow and economic growth within the state. Okay, in 2024, international migrants represented 84% of total U.S. population growth, and they represented 3/8 of new residents in Tennessee. So on the eve of whatever it is that we're experiencing right now, okay, the Tennessee was poised to really be a place that was benefiting from international migration, and domestic migration has slowed down pretty substantially. Okay, this is giving you, just zooming out for a second, looking at the U.S. level, that births minus deaths number is the dark green bar. Okay, this figure, by the way, does include illegal immigrants, so you can see the big boost that they give to these numbers. But in any case, the light green number is net immigration from the rest of the world. The dark is births minus deaths. So what I just want you to notice from a U.S. overall perspective is that by the time we get to 2040, we as a country are going to go negative, and all of our population growth is going to come from net immigration. This is including illegal immigrants, like basically throwing everything at it. What is this thing going to look like? We're going to be shrinking by 2040 without immigrants from the country. Okay, I think 2040 is too late, by the way. I think it's going to happen a lot earlier, because I think one thing people don't do when the world is really uncertain is have babies. They just don't. Okay, would you have a baby right now? I wouldn't. I'm too old, but also I just wouldn't. So I think these numbers are going to shrink. We were kind of in an era of not a total baby boom, but we were in a pretty good pattern of births the last couple of years, and I just don't think that's going to continue. Okay. So then let me just say one more thing about population. The U.S. population, I'm sure you all are aware, the U.S. population is aging, like really fast. And so I think the best way to look at this is these three lines. Red is age 16 to 64, light purple is 65 plus, and dark purple is 75 plus. So just watch those things change over time, right? And by the time you get to the 2010s, the growth rate for the 16 to 64 population is like 0.3% per year. Okay, and this is including, by the way, immigrants. Okay, and then if you look at the 2022 to 2032 projections, the 16 to 64-year-old population has really declined. The growth rate has really declined, and then you're seeing some aging, some substantial aging and growth in that 75 plus population. Okay, so big picture here, we have a population problem as a country and as a state if we think that economic growth is our goal, which you can decide you don't think that's your goal, and that's totally fine. But if you do think it's your goal, then we have a population challenge. Okay, and we had been relying on migrants from the rest of the country to Tennessee to kind of close that gap. And then in the last year or two have been really relying on immigrants to help us solve that problem. And now kind of working our way through 2025, I don't know what the answer to that is, right? It's hard to imagine that internal migration within the country is going to pick back up. It's still healthy to Tennessee. People are still moving here. It's just not at the pace it was before, right? So our ability to drive economic growth off of people coming to the state is pretty limited. One other thing I want to say really quickly before I go on to the productivity side of the equation is that there's a narrative out there that, well, we can solve all of our workforce problems if we'll just get people to go back to work. Okay, and so I just want to share with you the facts. So the facts are, and it's the red line fact that I'm most interested in sharing with you, okay, which is that of our population prime age, which is 25 to 54, the share of people who are working or looking for work in that age group is the red line, okay? So it is almost as high as it has ever been in US history, okay? Very, very close, within 50 basis points, okay? So even if you went out and robbed that 50 basis points and said, y'all are coming back to work, right? We can't move the needle with trying to change our participation rate from 84% to 85%. You're not gonna get 100. Okay, so what do you think is the max? I don't know an economist who thinks that the max is anything greater than about 85 or 86. Okay, so we could spend a ton of time and effort trying to find people and make them go back to work. And that would be good for them, I think, but I don't know that it's going to move the country forward in terms of do we have a viable workforce and a strategy for continued growth in workforce. Okay, so backing up, remember I told you get economic growth from two things. You get it from more people who are equally as productive, or you get it from more productive people, right? We're gonna hold our workforce fixed, and then we'll just make people super productive. Okay, so let's talk about that for just a minute. So one way to measure productivity is to think about per capita income. Okay, so if you just think about the total GDP in a country and divide it by the number of people in the country, you get GDP per capita. We can do the same thing in the state. We'll call it income per capita. So how do we do in Tennessee in terms of the amount of goods and services we produce per person? And the answer is we don't do great relative to the national average, but we do well within the South. So this slide is showing you the U.S. average GDP per capita, income per capita is $69,000 a year in 2023. In Tennessee, we were at 62, but 62 is third highest in the South. So again, hyper competitive. Florida and Virginia are ahead of us. Okay, we're third. North Carolina is behind us by like 50 cents, but behind is behind, as the game like says. Okay, so we're still winning. Okay, and then Georgia is way behind us. South Carolina is behind us. I'm so tired of hearing about how great the education system is in Alabama. I'm looking at you, Virginia. They're way behind us. Okay, Kentucky, Arkansas. Okay, so we are doing well within the South. We're not doing so hot within the country. If you decided that you thought Texas was Southern, we'd be in fourth place, not third. Okay, I don't think Texas is Southern, so I'm happy to let you know. Okay. All right, so, and so what, so we've got pretty decent per capita income. One thing, just kind of side note, is this. I know this is really hard to read, but what this will tell you right here, Tennessee's right here, this is the kind of map that economists really like. I hate this thing. But you're supposed to be able to find your state just like you would on a map. Does that make sense? Except they're like hexagons or whatever. Okay, so this is the share of income that people are spending on their monthly mortgage payments. Okay, so look at our neighbors. Arkansas, 28, Mississippi, 27, Alabama, 29, West Virginia, 22, Kentucky, 27, Tennessee, 41. Okay, so with that high income, okay, in our graduation into the sphere of Virginia, Florida, and North Carolina, we've also brought ourselves into the land of expensive housing. Yeah, so, mixed bag. Higher incomes, but also we're spending a ton of it on housing right Okay, I just have a couple more slides, so hang in there with me, because this one's a doozy, but I wanna just think for a second. What would it take for the US, for Tennessee to do better in terms of per capita income? Like, what do we have to do? Okay, what would make our productivity better? So you might think, first thing, we got the wrong industries. Okay, so you could look around and you could go to Sevier County and be like, we have way too many people working in retail or tourism, or we don't have enough people working in tech, or whatever, name your category, okay? And so that's not true. All right, so let me show you this slide. So the black bar here is the average US wage in each one of these industries. The orange bar here is the average wage in Tennessee in each one of those industries. Okay? The blue line is the Tennessee average wage across all the industries. Right? And what I'm telling you is that if I took our economy and I reweighted it to look like the rest of the country, so I moved people, if we're below, you'll notice, like, look down here. The share of US employment in manufacturing is 9.4, and in Tennessee it's 12.6, and we're way behind in trade transportation. We're ahead in trade transportation and utilities, but we're behind in information, and we're behind in professional business services, and we're behind in education, health services. If I just said, okay, well, let's just mimic the rest of the country in terms of our industrial mix, it wouldn't move that blue line. So that's not the answer. The problem is that within every industry, we are below US average productivity. Our workers in those industries, in those jobs, earn less than they would if they were in some other place in the country, on average. Okay, they earn more than they would if they were in Alabama, but they earn less than they would if they were in Florida and Virginia. Okay, and so why is that, right? So the university has been doing a ton of work trying to understand this. Think about the University of Tennessee's broader mission in economic development as being, let's figure out how we move from 62,000 a person to 69,000 a person. Okay, what will it take for Tennessee to get there? Right? You've got to have that every worker becomes more productive, and therefore every worker needs to have access to a different set of skills, more education, and a higher productivity job. Right? They need an employer who values them and can allow them to be more productive than they currently are. So let me give you a couple of clues as to why that's not happening in Tennessee right now, right? I could show you the basic thing, the simple thing, which is that we have lower rates of college graduation than the rest of the country. That's easy. We've known that forever. If you remember Governor Haslam, he said, we gotta have a drive to 55, right? We're gonna get 55% of Tennesseans to have some sort of higher credential beyond high school. We're not there yet. Our college graduation rate is still about 30%, so 30 of every 100 Tennesseans have a college degree, which I know is hard to believe, but it's true. Okay, but I don't want us to belabor the question about what credentials do people have. Okay, the bigger problem is one around R&D. So let me tell you something that you probably don't know. If you look at 8th grade math and science students across the state, across the country, Tennessee students do just fine. We are not, our 8th graders are no less qualified to do math and science at 8th grade than any student in this country, okay? That is not our problem. We are, the government supplied research and development funds in this state, 8th in the country. Okay, so we have a ton of federally sponsored research. Oak Ridge National Lab is a great example, Y-12 is another example. We have tons of assets there. We are investing well in higher education. Our investment in Tennessee per capita is 12th in the country. Okay, our higher ed institutions are well funded. Don't tell anybody I said that when we come asking for money, but we are. Okay, the problem is that our businesses don't do high tech, don't do R&D. So here's an example. Okay, this is coming from the National Science Foundation. This is business performed research and development, okay, as a percentage of total private industry output. Folks, we are, like, you can't even see us down here, 42nd in the country, right? We are not, our employers are not the kinds of employers that are doing high productivity work, right? Then, look at this one stunned me. Bachelor's degrees in science and engineering conferred per 1,000 individuals aged 18 to 24, 47th. out of 50. Okay? So what are we missing as a state? We're missing, I think, the opportunity to kind of live into the new economy. And this is not about AI, it's not about that. It's about basic STEM. It's about the fact that, for example, we have recruited a bunch of vehicle manufacturers, auto manufacturers to the state. Do you know what they do here? They assemble things. Do they do any R&D? Not a lick. Okay, all of that R&D is in Michigan. So what the university is working on is trying to convince employers when they cite to the state and trying to convince our state partners, when you recruit somebody to the state, please insist that they bring with them the types of jobs that would require these higher level degrees and allow people to be much more productive. So, okay, so that's my speech for today. I did all of that without mentioning trade policy, but I'm happy to talk about trade in the Q&A if anyone would like to do so. I'll get Sam first.
All right, great. All right, Marianne, I was curious, one of the first slides you showed productivity, I didn't see China on there. Is it due to the lack of accurate information that you didn't show that, or do you have an opinion on that? Just curious.
They probably exceeded us in terms of growth, but I don't have a number that I wish to stake my credibility on. How's that? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I actually was gonna first ask exactly what Sam did, but you were just talking about the engineering, and I have some friends whose kids just in the last year or so graduated from UT in engineering, and I was shocked that they were kind of struggling to find jobs. Are you sort of finding that? I mean, they've eventually gotten them, but I thought literally engineering, they would just be lined up with job offers, and so I didn't know if that went along with your last.
That's a great anecdote. What we hear from the state is we need 50,000 more engineers in the state than we currently have. I don't know what that would have been based on other than open positions, so I don't know. It might depend on the kind of engineering that we're trying to do. For example, we have a couple who were like, well, I do biomedical engineering, and I was like, that's not the kind of healthcare industry we have in Tennessee. That's what they have, and they have that in Virginia, they have that in Massachusetts, they have a little bit of that in Chicago, but we don't have that in Nashville, right? We have, yeah, I mean, right, our healthcare industry in Nashville is managing healthcare. It's not biosciences, right? It's just a totally different thing.
Marianne, tell us about that, everything that you're talking about, the immigration and international, whatever. How does that correlate to UT? Are you seeing a rise in numbers in international students in the undergraduate? That's all I'm talking about. Because graduates, I know you can bring them from wherever, but the ones that are homegrown here.
Yeah, good question. Is Matt still here? He's flat out. No, I don't. So the University of Tennessee has not traditionally had a strong undergraduate program in recruiting students from other countries. That has not been a thing that we have done very consistently. Now, on a day like today, that's been good, right? Because we haven't had to worry about what happens when you lose all of that revenue. But that has not been something that we've invested heavily in, so I haven't seen any change in our undergrad population. Our graduate students, depending on the field, there's some fields at UT where graduate students are predominantly coming from other countries.
So you mentioned AI, and all we hear about news and how it's going to take these productive jobs. Well, how do you feel about that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
You should cheerlead AI all day long because it helps you solve your labor problem, right? So like if you want Tennessee to continue to grow at 3%, okay, and population growth is going to struggle to hit 1%, which it is. It's probably going to be more like 0.5%. Then you got 2.5% growth that you gotta get from productivity. Okay, and in the long run, the only statistic I know about long run productivity in the US says it's somewhere between 1.5 and 1.7. Okay, so you got a gap that you gotta fill. And AI can fill that gap, right? And it can get us to the growth rates that we're used to without having the amount of incoming migration that we've had. I don't personally worry about AI taking jobs. We need AI to take some jobs because appear to be insistent on not having immigrants. So we're gonna have some solution to our problems. And so I think, you know, and somebody says like, well, what if AI produced like 5% productivity a year? Like, more than 2% of us could go home and we'd still be at 3% growth. So I feel like this is a positive, you know, like there are social costs for people going home, I get that. But like, I don't think we should ever step back from a technology that makes us more productive. I don't know a single problem that is easier to solve than less GDP. I just don't.
I may just missed this, but you said that in 8th grade, our students are just as good as anybody.
Yep.
But then you also say, well, you want industries to bring in higher tech or whatever level jobs. There's a chicken or an egg problem there, I think, because what do the 12th grade records show? I'm wondering about our high schools and whether we get them ready, whether it's through a Mississippi State or whether it's the UT or whether it's a PhD. I wonder if that's a problem.
Yeah, good question. We don't measure high school acumen in math and science like we do at 8th grade, so I don't know the answer to that question. And do we have a chicken and egg problem? Absolutely, right? Because if an employer saw my last slide, they would never bring a high-tech operation to Tennessee, right? So it has to be both. We have to both kind of try to drive students towards degrees in these areas and at the same time convince employers to come here. And you could also try to convince employers to come here and say, people will move for you, right? But I don't really think that's the story we want to tell. Like, we moved this company to Tennessee and then they recruited all of their workforce from California and everybody's better off. I don't really think that's what we wanted, right? So I think we're in a better position if we can argue that the workforce will be there. You know, they're trying to do this in Blue Oval City, like they're building the state is building a training facility on the property of the Blue Oval plant. The problem is the Blue Oval plant is making electric F-150s, which, you know, I mean, I don't know when that is going to be market viable, but now you can see.
Follow-up question. Is there, what kind of efforts is UT or whoever making to educate our legislature about our schools and from these facts?
A lot. Yeah, I mean, we talk, like, I share these slides with others on campus, like, we're trying to build a narrative that helps the state make better decisions. You know, and I think about this a lot, like, state legislatures have to be really, really good in worlds where revenues aren't increasing by 3 to 5% every year. When we can deliver 5%, 6% revenue growth, tax revenue growth in the state year over year over year, our state legislature doesn't, I mean, I'm not suggesting they don't work hard. They do work hard, but they don't have to make difficult choices. Okay, if these numbers slow down and we grow by 1%, or we start shrinking in terms of tax revenues, they're gonna have to get good, because they're gonna have to make hard choices and make good decisions. And we just haven't been in that situation for a long time, right? And so it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, like, why should you care about growth? I think that's one reason you should care, is it takes the pressure off of, do we have to have perfect politicians? No, we don't, right? Okay, I take one more and okay, wait, you, yeah, hang on. Wait, hang on. I know you, okay, here.
Okay, so my question has to do with this negative birth rate. China has been suffering from a negative birth rate for quite some time. Have they started to recover? Because they did vote for their one-child policy, and if they have not, is there a potential for them to do so? Is it too late?
I'm not a China expert, but as far as I know, they've shown no ability to change that. It's really hard to make people have babies. Like, the key is don't ever let them stop. Okay, so you have to, like, it's a cultural thing. It takes hold, and then that's it, right? And so because you change the way that you invest in kids when you have this, now this is not the marker, I know I'm right at the time. I'll be quick. But when you have fewer children, you start to change the way that you treat them. Okay, so those of you who have 6 kids, treat yours differently than me who has 2, right? I overparent, overinvest. And so then that's a norm. And so all of my friends have 2 or 3 kids, and we all overparent, overinvest. And now if the government comes and says, well, I need you to have 6 again, I'm like, well, I can't afford 6 because I'm overparenting and overinvesting, right? And so we're in a overparenting, overinvesting mode. And it's hard to go back. And in China, same thing, right? I mean, you're talking about overparenting and overinvesting. Holy moly, right? That child is like everything to that family. So when they say like, no, we need to have two of them, well, they can't afford two of those. They can't double that investment, but they also can't back off. Do what? We can't, yeah, I can't afford one too, so that doesn't okay. No, so you know what I mean? So it's hard, it's just, there's not great evidence in history for people, for societies going back up that curve. Like, once you get down that thing, it's hard to move back. The country's still ahead of a lot of other countries on birth rate. We're way ahead of Europe still. We're just not where we used to be. Elon, well.
Thank you, Marianne. It was very,